The plate shattered against the wall, spaghetti sauce splattering like blood across the family photos. "You're what?" Robert Thompson roared, his face twisted in disgust as he stared at his son Miles. In that instant, the secret Miles had guarded for years exploded into the open, shattering more than just dinnerware. It tore through the fragile peace of their suburban Seattle home. Miles froze, his heart pounding so hard he could barely breathe. His mother Linda dropped her fork, eyes wide with shock, while his sister Emily gasped from across the table. But it was Grandpa Harold who remained eerily calm, his weathered hands folded on the table as if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. Miles had always known this day might come, but not like this. He was 24, a graphic designer who had just landed his first big client in downtown Seattle. The text from Asher had been innocent enough, a simple, "Can't wait to see you tonight, love." But Robert had snatched the phone from the counter while Miles was helping clear dishes. One glance at the screen, and everything changed. "No son of mine is going to live like that," Robert spat, his voice cracking with a mix of anger and something deeper, maybe fear. The room smelled of garlic and regret, the warm lights of the dining room suddenly feeling too harsh, too exposing. Miles wanted to run, to disappear into the rainy Pacific Northwest night outside. Instead, he stood rooted, his hands trembling at his sides. He had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his head, practicing in the mirror of his small apartment, but nothing prepared him for the raw betrayal in his father's eyes. Linda reached out instinctively, but Robert slammed his fist on the table, making the glasses jump. "How long have you been lying to us?" he demanded. Emily, only 19 and home from college for the weekend, looked between them, her phone forgotten in her lap. Then Grandpa Harold cleared his throat. The old man, 82 and still sharp as a tack, pushed his chair back slowly. Everyone turned to him, expecting the usual lecture about family values or the Bible verses he sometimes quoted at holidays. Instead, Harold looked straight at Robert and said softly, "Sit down, son. I understand more than you know." His voice carried the weight of decades, steady and unshakable. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Robert's mouth opened, then closed. Linda's hand froze midair. Emily's eyes widened in confusion. Miles felt the air leave his lungs. What did Grandpa mean? The old man had been a Marine, raised Robert with iron discipline, preached about hard work and tradition. Yet here he was, staring down his son with a quiet certainty that silenced the entire room. Harold didn't elaborate right away. He simply picked up his napkin, wiped his mouth, and stood. "Miles, come with me to the porch. The rest of you finish your dinner." It wasn't a suggestion. Miles followed, legs numb, the screen door creaking behind them like a sigh of relief. Outside, the Seattle rain had eased to a mist, the city lights twinkling across the sound. Harold lit his pipe, the one he only smoked on special occasions, and leaned against the railing. "Your father thinks he's protecting you," he said finally. "But protection and control aren't the same thing." Miles waited, heart still racing. For the first time that night, he felt seen, not judged. Harold's next words came slow and deliberate. "I hid who I was for 50 years. Lost friends, watched men I cared about suffer alone. Don't make my mistakes, kid." Miles stared at his grandfather, the world tilting under his feet. The confession hung between them, simple yet seismic. Back inside, the clatter of dishes had stopped. Robert's voice rose once, then fell silent again. Miles didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Eviction from the family narrative, awkward silences at holidays, or worse. But in that moment on the porch, with Harold's steady presence beside him, a tiny crack of possibility opened. He pulled out his phone and texted Asher. "Dinner went nuclear. Need to talk." The reply came instantly. "I'm here. Always." Miles pocketed the phone, breathing for the first time since the plate hit the wall. The journey ahead would test every part of him, but at least now he wasn't walking it completely alone. The next morning, Miles woke in his childhood bedroom feeling like a stranger in his own skin. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting stripes across the faded posters of Seattle Seahawks and old comic books he hadn't touched since high school. Downstairs, the kitchen was too quiet. No radio playing classic rock, no smell of coffee brewing the way Robert liked it strong and black. He showered quickly, avoiding the mirror, then slipped out the back door before anyone could corner him. His beat-up Honda Civic waited in the driveway, the one he'd bought with his first paycheck. As he drove toward the city, the Space Needle rising like a beacon against the gray sky, Miles replayed last night's porch conversation on loop. Grandpa Harold hadn't said much more after that bombshell. Just patted Miles on the shoulder and murmured, "Call your young man. Life's too short for regrets." Then he'd gone inside, leaving Miles to process the revelation that his stoic grandfather had once loved men in secret. It explained the quiet sadness in Harold's eyes during family stories, the way he never pushed Robert too hard on certain topics. Miles wondered how many nights Harold had lain awake, carrying that weight alone. The thought both comforted and terrified him. If even Grandpa had hidden, what chance did Miles have at being fully accepted? He pulled into the parking lot of the small cafe in Capitol Hill where Asher worked part-time as a barista when he wasn't teaching high school history. Asher was already there, wiping down tables, his dark curly hair tied back and his flannel sleeves rolled up. The moment he saw Miles, he set the rag down and pulled him into a hug right there in the doorway. "You look like hell," Asher said gently, his voice warm like the espresso he brewed. They grabbed a corner booth, away from the morning rush. Miles spilled everything: the thrown plate, his father's rage, Grandpa's unexpected alliance. Asher listened without interrupting, his brown eyes steady. "I'm sorry you had to go through that alone," he said when Miles finished. "But you're not alone now." Their relationship had started 6 months earlier at a mutual friend's art show downtown. Asher had admired Miles' graphic designs on display, striking up a conversation that lasted until closing time. What began as shared laughs over bad coffee turned into late-night talks about everything from politics to favorite books. Asher was out and proud, raised by 2 moms in Portland who had marched in every pride parade since the 90s. He made acceptance look easy, but Miles knew it wasn't. Asher had lost his first job after coming out in college. "Your dad will come around," Asher said now, squeezing Miles' hand under the table. "Or he won't. Either way, you get to decide how you live." Miles wanted to believe it. They spent the day wandering Pike Place Market, the salty air mixing with the scent of fresh flowers and seafood. For a few hours, the family storm felt distant. Asher bought him a bouquet of sunflowers just because, and they kissed quickly behind a stall when no one was looking. But as evening fell and Miles drove back toward the suburbs, dread crept in. His phone buzzed. "Mom, come home for dinner. We need to talk." No mention of Dad. Miles gripped the wheel tighter. At home, the tension was thick enough to cut. Robert sat at the head of the table, jaw set, staring at his plate. Linda had made Miles' favorite lasagna, a peace offering that felt fragile. Emily texted under the table, "Dad's been pacing all day." Grandpa talked to him this morning. Harold joined them late, carrying a worn photo album Miles had never seen. "Before we eat," the old man said, placing it in the center, "I want to show you something." He opened to a black and white picture of 2 young men in Marine uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. "That's me and Tommy, 1965. Best friend I ever had. We promised each other we'd stick together after the war." The room went still again. Robert's fork hovered. "Dad, what are you?" Harold cut him off. "Tommy died in Vietnam. I never got to tell him how I really felt." "Don't make Miles carry that same silence." Linda covered her mouth. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Robert pushed his chair back, but this time he didn't yell. He just stood there, breathing hard, the anger cracking into something raw and uncertain. Miles felt the shift like a tide turning. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but the silence wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with questions no one had dared ask before. After dinner, Robert disappeared into the garage, tools clanging louder than usual. Miles helped with dishes, shoulder to shoulder with his mom. "I love you no matter what," she whispered. "But your father, he needs time." Upstairs later, Miles video called Asher. "Grandpa just dropped a bomb," he said, describing the photo. Asher smiled softly on the screen. "Sounds like you've got an ally in the trenches." They talked until midnight, planning a weekend getaway to the Olympic Peninsula, hiking trails where no one knew them, where Miles could breathe without family expectations pressing down. The next week blurred into work deadlines and stolen moments with Asher. Miles designed a logo for a local LGBTQ nonprofit, pouring his feelings into every line. But cracks appeared. At a family barbecue that Sunday, Uncle Frank made a casual joke about those rainbow people, and Robert laughed along a beat too long. Miles excused himself to the bathroom, splashing water on his face until the sting passed. Asher texted encouragement. "You're stronger than their jokes." Still, the misunderstanding grew when Miles hesitated to introduce Asher at a cousin's wedding. "Not yet," he said. Asher's face fell. "I get it. But how long do I stay in the shadows?" The drive home was quiet, the first real tension between them. Miles wondered if love meant risking everything, or protecting the people you cared about from the fallout. Weeks turned into a tense stalemate at home. Miles moved most of his things to a tiny studio apartment near Asher's place in Capitol Hill, citing work commute, but everyone knew the truth. Robert barely spoke to him during Sunday dinners, responding in grunts and passing the potatoes without meeting his eyes. Linda tried bridging the gap with small talk about Miles' latest projects, but the air felt poisoned. Grandpa Harold became the quiet anchor, calling Miles every Tuesday for chess at the senior center. "Your father's scared," Harold said one afternoon, moving his knight with steady hands. "Scared of what he doesn't understand. I was the same at his age." Miles lost the game, but gained perspective. He started volunteering at the nonprofit whose logo he'd designed, helping organize youth support groups. The stories he heard there, teens kicked out, adults still hiding from parents, mirrored his own fears and fueled a quiet determination. Asher, meanwhile, threw himself into lesson plans at the high school, but the strain showed. One Friday night after a long week, they argued in Miles' studio. "You keep saying soon about telling your family about us," Asher said, pacing the small space. "But soon never comes. I won't be your secret forever." Miles flinched. The misunderstanding cut deep. He wasn't ashamed of Asher. He was terrified of losing the fragile thread connecting him to his dad. "You don't know what it's like," Miles shot back, immediately regretting it. Asher's face hardened. "Actually, I do. My mom's fought for every inch of normalcy." They slept on opposite sides of the bed that night, backs turned like walls. Miles stared at the ceiling, replaying the fight. Love wasn't supposed to feel like this, full of landmines and half-truths. The betrayal came unexpectedly on a rainy Thursday. Emily called in tears. "I didn't mean to," she sobbed. "Dad found the group chat on my laptop, the one where I told my friends about you and Asher." Robert had confronted her, demanding details. Now the whole extended family knew. Miles' phone exploded with messages, some supportive, most awkward or silent. Uncle Frank sent a Bible verse. Aunt Carla offered to pray for healing. Miles drove to his parents' house in a fog, heart hammering. Robert met him at the door, face thunderous. "You made your sister lie for you?" The accusation stung worse than the thrown plate. Miles tried explaining, but Robert cut him off. "Get out. Until you fix this mess." Linda stood behind him, torn, tears streaming. Grandpa Harold appeared in the hallway, voice low but firm. "Robert, that's enough." For the second time, the old man's quiet authority stopped everything cold. Robert slammed the door, but not before Miles saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. That night, Miles crashed at Asher's apartment. They didn't talk much, just held each other on the couch while rain drummed the windows. "I'm sorry for pushing," Asher whispered. "I get it now." The sacrifice felt real. Miles had lost the last scrap of normalcy with his dad, but it also freed something. The next morning, he woke to a text from Harold. "Coffee at the diner. Bring Asher." Miles stared at the screen, stunned. He woke Asher gently. "Grandpa wants to meet you." The diner on the edge of town smelled of bacon and fresh pancakes. Harold was already there, newspaper folded neatly. When Asher approached, the old man stood and extended a hand. "Heard a lot about you, son. Sit. Tell me about teaching history." The conversation flowed easier than Miles expected, Harold asking thoughtful questions about Asher's students, sharing stories of his own service days without the usual Marine bravado. By the time coffee refills arrived, Miles felt the knot in his chest loosen. But peace was short-lived. Back at work, Miles received an email from his boss. A conservative client had seen the nonprofit logo and threatened to pull funding unless Miles was reassigned. "It's not personal," the boss said in the meeting. just business. Miles refused to step down. This is who I am, he told them. The decision cost him the project, but he walked out with his head high. That evening, he and Asher hiked Discovery Park, the city skyline fading behind them. You chose yourself today, Asher said, lacing their fingers. I'm proud of you. Miles kissed him under the trees, the gesture feeling like a vow. Yet doubt lingered. Had he burned bridges beyond repair? The turning point arrived unannounced 2 days later. Robert showed up at Miles' studio uninvited, rain dripping from his jacket. He didn't yell. Instead, he handed over a small box. Inside was the old photo of Harold and Tommy, now framed. Your grandpa made me look at this every night this week, Robert said gruffly. Said if I couldn't accept you, I'd lose you the way he lost Tommy. Miles swallowed hard. Robert didn't hug him, didn't apologize outright, but the gesture spoke volumes. Come to dinner Sunday. Bring Asher if you want. The invitation hung like a fragile bridge. Miles nodded, tears threatening. Sunday dinner arrived with the weight of history. Miles drove to the suburbs with Asher in the passenger seat, both dressed casually but carefully, jeans and button-downs that said, respectful, without pretense. The house looked the same. Trimmed lawn, American flag fluttering, Linda's flower beds bright against the gray sky. But inside, everything felt different. Emily greeted them at the door with a tight hug, whispering, Dad's trying. Grandpa threatened to move in if he didn't. The table was set for 6, lasagna steaming again. Robert stood when they entered, extending a hand to Asher first. Asher, he said, voice rough. Welcome. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't ice either. Conversation started stiff, weather, Seahawks scores, but gradually warmed. Asher shared a funny story about a student who mixed up the dates of the Civil War, and even Robert chuckled. Miles watched his father, noting the subtle changes. Less rigid posture, glances that lingered instead of sliding away. After dessert, Robert cleared his throat. I talked to the pastor, he said. Not for you, for me. Turns out the Bible's got more about love than I remembered. The admission landed softly, no fireworks, but Miles felt it in his bones. Linda squeezed his arm under the table. Yet the road wasn't smooth. At work the following week, Miles learned the conservative client had spread rumors in industry circles. A big pitch meeting fell through when the potential partner cited personal values. Miles sat in his car afterward, staring at the rain-streaked windshield. The sacrifice of staying true to himself was costing opportunities. He called Asher, voice cracking. Maybe I should have kept it quiet. Asher drove over immediately, bringing takeout Thai. No, he said firmly. You built that reputation on talent, not secrets. Family tensions resurfaced at Thanksgiving. Uncle Frank arrived with his usual bluster, making a pointed toast about traditional values. Robert stiffened but didn't laugh this time. Instead, he looked at Miles and said, Tradition evolves, Frank. Or it dies. The room went quiet. Frank muttered something and changed the subject, but the line had been drawn. Miles caught his dad's eye across the turkey, a small nod of solidarity. Later, helping with dishes, Robert admitted, I'm not good at this yet, but I'm trying. Meanwhile, Asher's school faced its own storm. A parent complained about inappropriate books in his history class, ones that included LGBTQ figures. The principal called Asher in, suggesting he tone things down. Asher refused. History is history, he told Miles that night. I won't erase people to make others comfortable. Their parallel battles bonded them deeper. They spent weekends volunteering together at the youth center, mentoring teens navigating their own comings out. A major misunderstanding nearly derailed everything in December. Miles overheard Asher on the phone with an old friend from Portland, laughing about finally having a normal holiday. Miles assumed it meant Asher wanted to leave, to escape the drama of Miles' family. He withdrew, canceling plans and answering texts curtly. Asher noticed immediately. What's going on? He asked during a walk along the waterfront. Miles confessed his fear. Back home, Grandpa Harold's health took a dip. Nothing serious, just arthritis flaring, but it prompted Robert to drive him to appointments. On one trip, Harold apparently shared more stories about Tommy. Robert came home quieter, more reflective. One evening, he asked Miles over for coffee, just the two of them. As the year ended, Miles reflected on the journey.